Right, welcome back to another Procurement Finance Coffee Break. Richard Beaumont, still a procurement guru. I haven't yet managed to achieve a change of status yet. I haven't collected enough reward points. But anyway, nice to see you.
And I'm Claire Green, your finance transformation expert. And today we're diving into the topic that is essential for the long-term success of any organisation, and that is, how do you create a culture of continuous improvement? And we kind of touched upon this topic on a previous coffee
finance transformation. I think we both said afterwards that we kind of fitted in the continuous improvement at the end, and actually probably worth talking about as a topic of its own.
So I think what I was talking about before is, you know, when I've done consulting work to define a target operating model for companies. Often what I've seen is that implementation of that new target operating model has been a massive transformation project. And I was saying basically, you know, when you implement a target operating model, you should have a mechanism within that operating model to keep that operating model up to date and not let it be something you implement and then that sort of manual sits on a shelf collecting dust until you have to go through another transformational change.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we talked about this idea in the last coffee break about, you know, a transformation project is often seen as we're at this baseline state. We're going to do a great big change and then we're going to have our future operating state, job done. And one of the things we talked about that, you know, the need, why that big step is such a big issue is because it is so complex. It involves so many spinning wheels, so many things can go wrong, that actually, wouldn't it be nice if instead of trying to do that great big step, you just did a succession of little incremental steps?
Well, I think those when you go through that level of transformation, obviously it's more costly, isn't it?
Because, it is,
because when you go through that a massive step change in the way a business operates, it involves a big project and a lot of change management, and sometimes it can impact your people as well. It could sometimes lead to retention issues.
Funny you say that. It's funny you say that. So we hit on this that actually continuous improvement isn't just an activity; it's a culture. So let's just start at the beginning, shall we? Which is what would you say are the key things you need to do if you're going to properly embed continuous improvement as a truly cultural aspect of your business?
So I think it can't be just like some one-liner in people's objectives. It has to be embedded into the processes that you operate. So that does assume that perhaps you have defined your operating procedures. That you have a standard operating procedure, that you have a process owner for those procedures. So
you understand where you are, how it works, who owns each bit of it. So we've got that.
And then I think also linking. So once we've got what is it we do, how do we do it, and who owns that process? So some sort of RACI or process ownership. I think it also involves having a definition of what good looks like. You know, so
what are you trying to achieve?
Yes, what is it you're trying to achieve, and what metrics are you going to use to monitor this continuous improvement? So for example, I don't know, let's say you're in finance and you've got a history of late VAT returns. Perhaps you then have a process for compiling the VAT return that's assigned to, let's say, a tax manager. That tax manager is then set a KPI within their performance metrics of on-time VAT returns that do not require a correction post it being submitted. So you can see how you can go from, let's say you had a history of late returns that needed to be corrected to a standardized process assigned to a responsible person with some metrics involved.
I mean, if I come in from a sort of engineering background, procurement, you're talking about how do we improve a design so it's simpler to build with less waste, less cost, less material? It's those small kind of changes where you're not trying to, take 50% of the cost out. You're saying, look, if we could just take out 2 to 3% of cost a year, just by improving the way we design and reducing waste, we improve, bottom line performance.
But I think it's also important if in my example, just because that's something I was talking about in the past.
Experience of late VAT returns.
Yes, the late VAT returns. Okay. So you've worked out you've got late tax returns. I've just said VAT. It doesn't matter what it is.
It is just late.
But let's say one of the underlying causes for the late VAT returns or the need to resubmit the VAT returns was poor data. Even if you'd had a defined process, assigned it to a responsible person and put that KPI in, if you just ignore any causes of that KPI being met and said, Richard, I've tasked you with getting these VAT returns on time. What's the matter? And you say, actually I have to spend like half the month trying to piece together data to be able to do them. So I think it's important to be able to identify root causes when it's still not happening and be able to address those issues, because if you set smart measurable goals, which is what I'm basically saying here, but that person cannot achieve them for some other factor, let's say it's just incredibly bad underlying data.
Okay, so I'm going to come in with the obvious challenge, right? So what we've said so far is really, actually, everyone will say, well, that's straightforward. I know what I want to improve, so I'm going to define what improvement looks like. I'm going to set a really clear target for what would indicate we have made that improvement. But everyone knows in organisations that still doesn't happen, because culturally you commit to all of these things and all these daily KPIs, but the needle doesn't move. So therefore, how do you, what do you actually have to do to make it happen in an organisation? This is really, I suppose, the people side of the culture. It's all very well having the leadership, the management, the intention, but if it doesn't happen, then it.
I mean, like, say in that example there, let's say there was issues with the underlying data, and let's assume that tax manager wasn't responsible for the underlying data because it would come from order to cash, other processes not under their ownership. This is where I think in order to achieve those goals, you've got to get buy-in from employees at all levels. So again, this is where I think a RACI is kind of useful, because you might have the tax manager as the responsible person, but all the information that goes into a tax return comes from different stakeholders all across the organisation, and it'd be true of any process. A finance, if you put specific, let's say, objectives against the FP&A team, a lot of those metrics that they'll report will be operational in nature. So I think it's important to work out, who else are the major stakeholders in the contribution to success, and how are they motivated. And also provide opportunities for continuing learning and development across the organisation. So,
we talked, again, previous coffee break, we talked about supplier incentive program. Actually, surely there's then a place for, not just a suggestions box, which, we may have grown up with, or I suppose it's our Survey Monkey suggestions. But actually, if you want your team to commit to continuous improvement, then just like a supplier incentive program, your employees have got to feel that they're also going to benefit from their work to deliver improvement. I mean, if all it does is go to shareholder value and, board bonuses, actually, why would I not just turn up and do it the way I've always done it? I mean, I think, as you say, committing to training people so they're better able to execute, but also incentivizing them through letting them feel the benefit of the improvement they're contributing to, is super important as well. It can't just be you contribute and the reward goes somewhere else.
I mean, I think recognising small wins is great. I do think having performance-related pay does motivate people, but what you don't want to do is have KPIs and PRP, and then people feel that, as I gave an example, they hit a roadblock due to something out of their control. So this is where you've got to look at the process from sort of cradle to grave, understand who are all the contributing parties, and if say that the main responsible person sits in finance, but I know a major contributing party is operations. Well, that's where ultimately the CFO and, let's say, the CEO need to have joint high-level objectives, and they're cascaded down. Because what you often see is finance having one sort of objectives and operations have another sort of objective. But actually, the processes span both departments.
No, right, okay. So as ever, I'm going to come down and focus on people. So, all right, we're not talking about great big performance related pay, and we're not talking about, some complex incentive scheme. What are the basic things that leaders could do with their teams, with their people, to foster and encourage that culture of continuous improvement? What could they do?
Yeah, I think for all things that leadership need to lead by example, really.
Yep.
So leadership needs to provide a model of a continuous improvement mindset.
Yep.
It should demonstrate their own commitment by sharing their own learnings and improvements, and showing how this culture applies to everyone. Not just frontline employees. And I think it's always useful to hear, where pilots or proofs of concept have worked in an organisation, particularly where so where I think continuous improvement really struggles across all organisations, seen this many times in consulting, is where I've alluded to quite a few times, where the process is cross-functional. So it might span sales, operations, finance, it might, another department. And when it does, most often, this is where you'll have perhaps a clash of priorities against in the different departments. So I think where leadership can really demonstrate this continuous improvement mindset is actually by getting together the CFO, the CEO, all the C-suite, and making sure that their objectives are aligned, and that, once they push, whatever KPI they're going to use to monitor continuous improvement down, that that's going to work, as a tax manager. They're not going to go, to the sales team, well, actually the data in order to cash is rubbish for submitting the tax return, and we need to improve that data. And they go, well, it doesn't affect us, so we don't care. You need to have everyone aligned.
And I think that kind of leadership role, as you say, that kind of, leaders modelling the behaviour they want to see, and, encouraging that just general mindset. And of course, there's just the small stuff. I mean, Mark Kohler talks about this as his, establishing a Zulu Bravo, which is, a good old fashioned jolly well done to people when they've done a great job, and actually never forgetting the power of highlighting someone to the rest of the organisation to say, John in, Treasury did X, which has contributed that, well done. And above all, like you just said, having the ability, not just within your team, but across teams, to be able to give feedback, to understand progress, is important. But, progress ultimately only exists if it's real. So how, obviously I come from Clair, I don't measure anything, but in finance you measure everything. So how do you, practically, how do you go about establishing measurement of progress with continuous improvement? I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah, so I was working with a client early this year, and it was a really interesting example of what I was saying about how silos can develop in different teams. So finance, we were looking at it was a working capital project, and finance were measuring DSO of to 30 days. So anything over 30 days they didn't want debt to go over 30 days.
No.
But not even having to interrogate the operations team to any degree. And we found out operations only really escalate the issue if it's gone over 90 days. Oh. So we didn't even sort of scratch the surface there and realise the two teams are working to completely different operational metrics. Right. So I think, sorry, to your question, and it's like, well, actually, if you make clear what your metrics are to the whole organisation, and those metrics can be in, some sort of management reporting, but they also should be cascaded down. I think there's also a lot of power in having interdepartmental meetings where both department heads join. Because often what you can get is, a conversation going on up here at maybe C-suite or heads of level. But then once it's actually the people doing the doing, it hasn't cascaded down right. As you say, someone's working to 90 days DSO and someone else is working to 30 days.
And I guess, look, at the same time, there's also the role for, just actually asking, after you've been doing this for a while, again, feedback, going and asking, look, how do you feel about it? Is this working? Have we, as one of the big things, I mean, this happens a lot in sports where, you set your target to be top of the league and you train and you're consistently in the bottom third of the league. And all of your culture and language is then based around the fact that you haven't achieved the top of the league. Whereas, in fact, if you've moved from the bottom of the league to 2/3 down the league, that's a big improvement. So actually talking to your people and saying, how do you feel about what's going on? Is it working? Are we setting the right targets? I guess that is always going to be important too, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So as promised, continuous improvement, we touched on it in finance transformation, come back to it. There's some really essential things about it. But guess what? Sounds like most of it involves engagement with people and making sure that you're leading it, you've got buy-in and you're talking to people, right?
Yeah. As I say, I think the main things are, you're clear on processes, responsibilities, particularly when they span, as I say, cross departments, that everyone's on the same page with what it is you're trying to do. From C-suite downwards, that's communicated across the teams, and then people are actually helped where they face challenges. And I gave my example with the crappy data that the tax manager had to deal with, which is I'm sure if any tax managers watching, they're going, yes, I face that all the time.
Well, look, I'm not going to close because Claire has got a last final line that I know she's been working hard to try and prepare.
What's that? Remember, improvement is a journey, not a destination.
There you go. She's been preparing that all week. Anyway, but no, it's true.
Yes.
It is. That's the whole point. And in the spirit of what we were talking about, agile, one improvement might actually lead you to realise that perhaps you need to change direction as well and therefore adapt. So, all right, well, listen, as always, we have fun. I hope you've enjoyed listening. Let us know what you think.
Yes, we've rambled on for enough.
We do. But that's good. We're quite happy to do that. But look, if you've got a topic or you want to participate, you'd love to be interviewed. If you've got a topic that you think we should cover, please let us know and we'll happily do it. But for now, from this week's episode of Procurement Finance Coffee Break, bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey.